I think as a leader, there's a lot of times I've thought of myself as the chief reinforcement officer, which is just like that North Star, that purpose, trying to keep reminding each other of why we're here and what we're trying to do, and staying focused there, as opposed to trying to get in the way of people's learning from their choices and things like that.
Welcome everyone to the Sports to Business podcast. This is Tanvir. Today we have a very special guest. We got Sean McCall. Sean, welcome to the episode, the podcast, Sports to Business. Thank
you very much. It's great to be here.
Sean, you are a managing VP at Pariveda Solutions. You are founder of a quasi-professional sports team. You're an advisory board member at Children's Museum of Houston, and you're a former varsity swim athlete from LSU. Great history. We'd love to dive into all these things today. Just kick it off, what is keeping you the most busy right now as things get back to normal after the pandemic?
Things are getting back to normal, and I'm grateful for that. What's interesting is the pandemic kind of shifted us towards lots of inside the house and our home family units. So we planted a lot of things, succulent gardens, stuff like that. But now things are opening back up. I just did some travel recently, internationally to play and then also to work. So yeah, it's fun to open back up. My son is a soccer player and my daughter's a gymnast. So thankfully all those are open and yeah, we've been enjoying kind of getting back on the sports circuit as well as the social circuit.
Amazing. It is great to see, I'm traveling internationally next week and I'm excited to see at least different viewpoints of how people have been dealing with the reopening across the world. Now, you mentioned your children are also into sports. So why don't we start there, Sean? What got you started as a swim athlete and what was the journey like to LSU?
Yeah, for me, sports started pretty early. My dad was an athlete. He was a gymnast and American football player as well, but just a very active person. And so we kind of grew up seeing him play some recreational soccer and things like that as an adult. So it was always something that I was around and it made a lot of sense, but just a highly active kid. I got involved in baseball, American football, soccer, swimming, all pretty young, and did just kind of this multi-sport athlete, generalist type thing. But I'm tall and skinny. Sometimes we call it a gangler. So I kind of sized out of soccer or American football pretty quickly, and really baseball as well. So swimming became one of these sports that was accessible to me given my body type. And then I think the other piece that's interesting about me is at this point in my life, I was in Louisiana where there was a October 1st cutoff to set the school year. And I'm a September 25th birthday. So I was the youngest and I guess kind of the smallest kid. And so me sort of finding my spots to be able to contribute, those weren't easy. I kind of had to fight for it. And I think that, it was some of those early struggles of either not getting picked or not getting to play much or, being 8th or 9th in the batting order or whatever it is that kind of sharpened me and fueled a lot of motivation for me to want to try hard and to be a cerebral athlete as well, even at a pretty young age.
That's interesting because I think it's, at least from an athlete perspective, it's well known that unless you've failed, unless you've seen hardships, victory does not seem as sweet. So I think you've had your fair share of challenges as a kid. How has that helped you grow as an individual through university and beyond?
Yeah, I think that just like you said, it tastes sweeter when you've had that hardship, but I think, nothing good comes easy and nothing that comes easy is all that good. I think that it really was the struggle that helped me understand that it was about the process more than the result. And swimming is really good for helping you see that, mostly because it's a race against the clock. There is winning and losing in swimming, but but not, not at levels below, the Olympics or NCAA or state. I guess what I mean is that it's really a matter of trying to improve on your time, to just go faster. And so as a swimmer, you'll be over the moon with joy if you go a faster time, even if you finished, fifth place or something, just because it was a fast meet. And you wouldn't be that thrilled if you did happen to win a meet, but you went a slower time. So I think it helped really, as a teenager, help me reorient around what's most important. And then, to connect the cycle of, set a goal, work hard, give your best effort, to just get into that cycle over and over, so that you see the connection between the hard work and the, the mental toughness, those things, and how they would translate into a successful race or into a good season.
As you said something that I love, it's that you are always competing against yourself, not the person beside you, because you don't want to be comparing yourself. So how do you actually bring that mentality to the business world, especially when everything is so competitive?
Yeah, well, you know what I think is interesting about the difference in sports and business is that sports gives these finite settings. There's a 90-minute game clock, or there's there's a race that's a certain distance. It's going to end, and in a short amount of time, we're going to know what your score or your time or your placing, what those things are. I think in business, we often don't work on those same timeframes. We have fiscal years and quarters, and we're reporting results, but and more recently, we've adopted agile mindset where we're chunking things down to 2-week chunks, but still, that's a pretty long time comparatively to get any feedback. So I think one of the main things is just to try to keep chunking it down further within business, so that we're giving each other feedback and that we know where we stand, so that we can make more micro adjustments instead of macro adjustments, because they take a long time to get feedback.
Yeah, because how do you know whether or not you are, learning or winning in business if you're not measuring yourself in those smaller chunks? If you're waiting a year, it's too late, especially in today's time frame.
That's right. Yeah, you'll make adjustments, especially like you said earlier, the victory is sweet when you put a lot into it. I think when you don't finish where you want to finish and you've put a lot into it, that level of motivation, it's a lot greater, I think, than the average. And so you need those feedback loops to help you understand what's working and what's not, help you tune into your body and your teammates, depending on what kind of sport you're in. So I think those things are not naturally present in business, but they're possible to do with more feedback loops, with more intentional after action reviews or retrospectives of what's working and what's not working, and then to try to chunk that down, like all the way down to even a sales proposal where a client says yes or no, or a promotion board, or these different things where we can choose to give some feedback in that moment.
Yeah, because in sports, we've got, we used to have a full playbook in the season, and obviously we had an off-season workout plan we followed. And the idea was that if you do these actions, the results will come. In business, in some of the companies that I worked at, we have had these high-level goals, and they get then distilled down into smaller goals for each of the departments and each individual employee that ties to the business success, but also your personal bonus. Now, sometimes those metrics, those goals actually become cumbersome, because now you're starting to do the actions to hit a goal, which might not be in the best interest for yourself or for the company. How do you know how far to go and track these leading or lagging indicators, and especially in sales, versus when to know that, we got to do it the right way versus just being fixated on these tools or these actions we're following?
That's a great question. I think that's right at the core of the intersection of analytics and business, because what you inspect, people will respect. And so if you start inspecting the wrong things, you'll drive behaviors, like weird behavioral outcroppings that you didn't expect. I think my reaction to the question is just, you've got to be clear on your purpose and to allow that to be the North Star of what guides decision making. And then you've got to give people latitude to make the right decision in the moment. If you get overly prescriptive, I think you can get some strange strange behavioral outcroppings, like I've said. So I think the purpose statement and continuing to reinforce the purpose and stay purpose driven, both as a leader and as an organization, is what feels the most important to me to try to keep from having some weird things happen.
Yeah. Going back to, Sean, your swimming at LSU, how was the transition? So you learned a lot of, we were talking about all these great concepts, but I think I would love to understand, how did you actually get into the business side of things after you graduated from LSU?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple, let me tell you a few more details here because I think it'll help set it up. So I ended up walking on at LSU. I had some full ride scholarships to some smaller schools, but I really liked the culture at LSU and I wanted to be a part of that kind of larger, it felt very semi-pro when I was there in terms of the way the school viewed athletes and the way the student athlete ecosystem worked. So I went there as a walk-on and ended up getting a scholarship and competing. That was wonderful. And then after I finished swimming, I moved on to an amateur sport called ultimate, or some people know it as ultimate Frisbee. It's like Frisbee football. And I went on to play there and played for the national team and in world championships and other stuff like that. So the transition from being a student athlete to being a professional, I think really started when I was taking on leadership roles as either team captain or even small things like treasurer. I was always interested in trying to serve. And I think this is part of that September 25th, October 1st cutoff thing, is that I had gotten used to as a kid trying to do extra stuff to try to work my way into spots and to be more than just an athlete, but to be a great teammate and to understand that purpose, that we weren't just trying to win, we were trying to have a team that everybody really felt connected and felt like it was something that they were proud of and that they wanted to spend their time on. Basically, I didn't have these words back then, but basically that something would be so enjoyable that you'd give your discretionary effort to it. You'd give your best self. So I used to do a lot of that stuff and really still do, so much so to where by the time I got to some of the behavioral interviews when I was finishing my college career, I was interviewing with, like a consulting company like Anderson Consulting, now known as Accenture, and they were asking a bunch of behavioral interview questions, things like, tell me about a time when you set a goal but failed, or tell me about a time when you had a teammate that wasn't pulling their weight. And as I went through the interview, I said, so I'm an athlete and I've got a great story from sports, but I certainly can go to school or community service or other things if you want. And the interviewer said, no, it's fine for you to give a sports example. And so I did almost the entire interview with examples from swimming and ultimate. And then also as a high schooler, I used to coach some youth sports because my dad was coaching my younger brothers and I asked him if I could hop on. So I had a lot of experience in motivating some younger kids and even doing goofy stuff like when I was coaching baseball, like really getting into the way the pros give the signals, like with the nose and the ear and the chin, just to help them feel like that they were real athletes and that this felt like the pros, just tapping into all those things. So I was able to really tell some stories. And, after the fact, I got the job and they gave me some feedback on the interview that like the stories I told, they were exactly the kind of thing that they wanted to hear. And it turns out that, being an athlete is tremendously useful because a lot of the work that we do, it's not solo work, it's team-based work, and being able to work well on a team is a big part of what they were scanning for.
It's funny that when I did my MBA, I interviewed for a role with ExxonMobil out of Houston, the Canadian company in Pula Oil. So I was a football player, graduated. I had coached the year of my MBA, and I had started a training camp before. All of my behavioral answers were those three things. I didn't have a single experience or a single, I wasn't working when I was playing football. And they told me as well that they loved my answers. So I think anybody listening who's a student athlete right now that thinks that they don't have the experience, what you are doing in the field, in the water, on the rink, people appreciate that. And I think
it matters.
Sean, great that you brought it up. Yeah.
Yeah, it matters. I think when I was doing it, I thought it wasn't going to matter. And I think I thought that, swimming was great. It might get me a scholarship, or playing ultimate was great. It gets me a group of friends and gives me some experiences around the world. But more so now, I realize it's really shaped me into who I am. And quite frankly, it's kept me young. It's kept me relevant. I'm hanging out with a bunch of people that are way younger than me. And there's times at work where they reach out and they say, Sean, we need you to talk with this group or this person because you relate so well to some of the younger generation. And I think it's just a big credit to sports for keeping me relevant and keeping me in some of those teams with the younger generation.
Yeah. On that note, we're in an age of digitization and disruption. The key is that instead of doing what worked for us in the past, Sean, we have to be reimagining our future. And I think sports teaches you that, because what worked for you last time is not going to work for you now. You always have to be iterating your playbook, your training, your nutrition. How has that played a part in what you just described, being able to relate with the younger generations, always being able to come with something new in the business world?
Yeah, it's super important because you need that in business as well. I think sometimes there's this feeling of like climbing the ladder is this straight shot, and when you get to the top, it's like sitting on top of a summit where you get to enjoy the view. It's quite the opposite. It's like getting to the top is a lot of hard work, not only to get there, but once you're near the top of an organization, it's tremendously difficult. I have a friend that calls leadership learning in public. And what I like that, because it says that a leader doesn't have all the answers. The leader is still figuring this stuff out, same as anybody else, but that it's really a matter of constant exploration, growth mindset, and being willing to try to learn how to ask better questions and tap into self-awareness to better understand oneself as a way, which is kind of a prerequisite to being able to lead others, is being able to lead yourself. So that's some of how I've thought about it, but I think you're right. You do have to reinvent yourself. And, I'm 50 years old at this point, and I'm still playing this sport of ultimate. I'm competing in some of the age divisions where it's some older guys, but I've continued to learn about my body, learn about training regimen with sleep and recovery and all kinds of mental side. And it's just really been a joy to just keep going. I think it's gonna keep me healthy for a long time. It keeps my friendship and my connection to close friends alive. And it keeps me running and jumping and playing and smiling and sweating and bleeding and all those things.
Well, two things. One, 100% agree. And two, you do not look 50 at all, man.
Thank you.
So I think for people watching the podcast, what's the secret? Is it just having fun and staying active? Is that the secret to staying young?
Well, I don't know what the secret is, but I'll tell you what works for me is that I married a gal that plays my sport as well, and that was real important because I wanted us to be a pairing that kept going, and then I wanted us to still be active as the kids were part of it. So, like my son, the first year we had to buy plane tickets. Like when he was age 3, he ended up getting Silver Elite on Continental, now United, because we took him everywhere, including all these international events. So, I think a big part of it is just like never stop playing. Yeah, there'll be injuries. Yeah, there'll be off seasons, and you do need to catch a break. But I think it's just never stop being active. And I don't say that from a glass house. There have been times where I have stopped. I've taken, a chunk of time off. And what I've realized is that the upside in the near term was not worth the downside in the long term. because I just think if you keep the lights on and you kind of never stop training, you never stop eating well, you never stop seeing yourself as an athlete, and finding the next game to play, then I think that's the best way. It's just like keep the lights on. It's a bit Seinfeld of like never miss a day, but I think that works.
Yeah, because if you go back one step, it's a lot harder to recover versus even if you don't feel like doing something, let's say working out one day, just getting a little bit of that in is going to keep you going, at least mentally, that, hey, I'm on this right track. 'Cause I was reading this book. It's like if you make a gain of about 100%, gain 50%, but if you go back, actually you make a 33% gain, but if you go back, you actually are 50%. You lost 50% of the gain that you had made. So actually losses hurt you more. So the key is to continue, keep going. The other thing that you said, Sean, is that you married someone who was active and played a similar sport as you. So I think being around people that actually motivate you to do well and stay healthy is also a big part of it, because a lot of times we surround ourselves with people that don't see things as our viewpoint, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, my wife didn't miss any seasons for the years that she delivered the children. That was important to her. So there was some intentionality that's there. But what I think was really striking to me is that she just still found a way to train. So she would, she would sit there and hold the baby while she was doing her lunges or whatever. And so I think that's not for everybody. I don't say that like if you're not doing that, then you need to look at yourself. It's not that at all. It's really just where there's a will, there's a way. And she was motivated and I was as well. And so we kept the lights on and we kept going. And I think that the results of that show later that we're still going and still playing well.
There's one question I want to ask you, and this kind of goes back to, you said climbing the top is never easy, and I'm sure you failed a lot. How do you handle failure as a leader, as a parent, as a friend?
So 3 different personas: leader, parent, friend. I'll tell you, I think the hardest one is as a parent. Mm-hmm. I find that I want to jump in and I want to tell the kids things to try to save them from some suffering or some failure that I had. But each time I do that, it doesn't go well. And what I realize is that, the way I learned the things that I learned wasn't because my mom and dad told me. It was because I bumped into some really uncomfortable stuff that jolted me into operating differently or seeing myself or the others differently. So a big part of it is just like taking a deep breath and letting them fail. It's one of the hardest things to do as a parent because you don't want to see your child suffer. But when I'm able to collect myself and be mindful in that moment and let it happen, it's so much better. And then what you can do as a parent is you can spend your time thinking about how you're going to help them pick themselves up, as opposed to how you're going to help them prevent the pain or the suffering. I think similarly as a leader, I think as a leader, there's a lot of times I've thought of myself as the chief reinforcement officer, which is just like that North Star, that purpose, trying to keep reminding each other of why we're here and what we're trying to do, and staying focused there, as opposed to trying to get in the way of people's, learning from their choices and things like that. That's been a tough road for me because I tend to step in and I get almost like paternalistic at times, wanting to really look after my team and have things go well and have the experience be good. But failure's just, it's integral to learning, and it's easy to say, it's a lot harder to do when you're in the moment. But I just think that it's got to be a conscious choice. You've got to make space for it. And then there's this Mario Andretti quote that I love: if you're not about to crash, you're not going fast enough. And so I think that there's an element of like, you have to fail to know that you're pushing the limits. You have to crash sometimes to know that you're going as fast as you can. Otherwise, you're just going to finish in the middle of the pack.
Yeah, and you're not going to take the risk that you need to take, especially in times like today. Our coach would always say, make mistakes full speed. because it's better for you to actually go full speed, make a mistake, because then you can correct yourself versus hesitate and somebody's going to run you over. I think that's so true in business today, at least in my experience.
That's a great quote.
Yeah. Sean, what are you doing today as a VP at Pariveda Solutions? What do you guys do? And what are some projects you're working on?
Pariveda is an interesting place. We're a hybrid between a management consulting shop and a technology implementation shop. And we build those capabilities in the same people. So they do both sides of that. That's been really fun. That's the mode that I came up in. So I came up through the ranks. I've been there nearly 14 years at this point, and have moved through leading the Houston geo and then into a global role around supply. And now I'm in more of a global R&D type role, where we're bringing some of our people-oriented solutions out to our clients, which has been super fun for me because it's yet another intersection with sports. It's a lot of small team formation and helping teams understand their purpose, how to set clear expectations with each other, how to align training plans around those expectations, and then how to tap into the experience that people have to make sure that we're giving people the experience that holds them in and leads them towards a fulfilling experience. So it's been really fun, including solutions that are kind of off the well-worn path, like creating an escape room that's focused on data literacy type learning objectives in a pop-up style. So all kinds of really fun things. It's been really, really joyful to be on the innovation side of the house.
Yeah, I think it's much needed, because in my experience working with large vendors, the biggest gap that I believe that still exists today is great strategy, but not having the team to implement it. And the actual client doesn't have the resources or the capabilities to do the implementation. So you have a great product that never sees the most potential that it does bring with it. So I think what you guys are doing is much needed. And, I think the success speaks for itself.
There's a loss in translation sometimes. Sometimes the management consultants I think of as the thinking team, and the technology implementers are the do team. There's often a loss in translation between think and do. We try to design that out by having that done with the same people. It's not easy, and in fact, a lot of our prospects kind of scoff at it and think it's not possible.
Exactly. I was going to say that.
Yeah, but it's a great experiment, and we're giving it a go. We're nearly 20 years in as a firm and growing and doing well. So, and I think that what we're finding is that folks that can do the thinking work and the doing work are highly regarded and highly valued by our clients. We end up being quite sticky because there's real value that follows our involvement, and that feels really good. Because our clients ask us back a lot, and they ask us to take on things. So probably one of the most joyful things that happens is when a client calls and says, "Hey, I don't know if you do this, but I know that you're good at solving problems in general." And so that's a fun moment because it kind of is indicative of the relationship shifting into different spaces, and that's what we're all about.
Well, that's amazing. Well, so how can everybody watching, listening, interested to get in touch with you personally, Sean, or to work with you guys? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best way, and we're pretty active in posting out there. And I've got a few new articles, kind of on some of these topics that I'll be posting in the next couple months. So yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way. Our company's pretty active on some of the other social channels, but my activity is probably more centered around LinkedIn.
Awesome. Last question before we end the podcast here. One advice for executives today leading in these disruptive times.
One piece of advice. It's a great question, and I have like 9 things swirling, so I don't know what the one is, but I'll tell you what comes to mind is that it's more important to say what you really feel, basically not to hold back, not to overly shape the message, and especially if that means that it takes some time to get it out. It's much better to call it the way you see it and to have a level of candor, as long as it's built on a foundation of mutual respect and trust. And this is where, coming back to that purpose, if you're all on the same page around the purpose, then you're able to challenge each other. And I think when you have that kind of challenge network, that's one of the things that the author Adam Grant talks a lot about is basically surround yourself with people that are going to challenge your ideas, challenge other people's ideas, and surround yourself with those kinds of people, and use the team to propel all of you to higher heights.
They'll work together, be authentic, and don't be afraid of being vulnerable. Awesome.
Well said.
Well, Sean, thanks so much for joining the podcast. It was a pleasure having you, and I think our listeners and viewers are going to take away some really good insights. So thanks again for being on the show.
I enjoyed being here. Thank you very much.